Welcome to the show, Jen. How you going?
Hey, great to see you.
Good to
Thanks for
connect all the
having
way
me.
from all the way from Seattle, I believe, right?
Yeah, hey, from the Pacific Northwest of the US. How's it going?
I love it. Well, one of the great things about doing these types of discussions and podcasts is chatting with people from all over the world with different, perspectives and learnings as well that they've had in their own experience. And Jen, with your background in startup businesses. You're obviously in leadership coaching and business coaching. You've also got a bit of a fitness background as well with some of the work you did as a fitness instructor. It'd be great to, I guess, link all of this together today and to talk about startup businesses. My personal experience with startup businesses is that I've ran one and I've gone through that patch of setting up something and really working your tail off to then get it and try and turn it into something meaningful. But through that experience, and I guess I like to talk from experience because it's most relatable to me, it's quite stressful. And also, as the leader, you really sometimes have your blinkers on and you're really just focused on putting your head down, sometimes to the detriment of the people around you and maybe the team that you're trying to create, perhaps, or and also the products and services that you're trying to build on and deliver. So, Jen, I imagine through your experience working at some of those startups that you've seen some of that before. Maybe a good place to start, Jen, is tell us a little bit about your experience in startups previously when you were working as was it VP in marketing? That's right.
That's right. Yeah. So yeah, I led marketing for two high growth startups. One of the first was a company called Cheeseburger, and Cheeseburger, if you remember the beginning of memes and cat memes specifically, we were very responsible for the popularizing of memes and
Great.
dudes jumping off buildings and things like that, right? Like, the fail of the world. And so I tell people a lot, like, you're welcome, I'm sorry, but yeah. So that was an incredible journey, being really early in that organization and growing with them, and then leading marketing for a company, a travel company that was acquired by Expedia called Trover, and really, helping these organizations grow. And being in leadership and seeing what that role is like, learning so much on the job. There's nothing like that experience, and having a role that is that big and that diverse day to day and ever changing and context shifting, and going from product market fit, to like changing the water bottle at the fountain, right? Like it's a bizarre, it's a
Yeah.
bizarre set of responsibilities. So yeah, really really unique and stressful, in its own way, for so many reasons, from the pressure and and the runway, and having a lot of stakeholders, like depending on your role, like a lot of stakeholders, from investors and co-founders and partners. And yeah, it's a unique it's a unique beast. I love the word you used, meaningful, to describe it. Like, you're trying to build it into something meaningful. And I was like, the coach in me is like, well, what does that mean? What do you mean by meaningful? What is, does that scale? Is that, unicorn growth? Like, what does that even mean?
Well, yeah, that's a good point. And I think, yeah, like if I go back to my channel, my startup sort of phase in our business, and in some, and I've been in our business at Pinnacle Health Group for 13 years, so it's been a long journey. But that we grew rapidly. We grew across multiple sites. We doubled our team in 1 year. We actually doubled our team and doubled our locations. And we weren't a tech business, and we're not a tech business, so it's a service business. Meaning, lots of, I guess, maybe a word that I like to use is operational drag, meaning that, like, whilst you're
Hmm.
trying to replicate your systems across a lot of areas, and we went from Melbourne to Sydney at that point. Yeah, you're just running into a lot of issues with that replication of what you're trying to do. And in my shoes, or what I was trying to do there, was to try and replicate or build out a good team culture across interstate, so meaning between two different sort of areas of Australia, or main cities of Australia, and really hard to do. One reason for that in my head as well is that it's really hard to embed culture across, different this is circa 5 years ago. No, less hybrid at that point in time. So really hard to sort of embed culture across, different locations, and really, the big part of that for us was recruiting great people, and we did manage to do that. But yeah, I'm thinking in your shoes as well, from when you're working in those startup businesses, you are taking on lots of responsibility. You mentioned, changing the water bottle to like to doing these great marketing ads. And in the case of me, it was something like similar. Might be like vacuuming the carpet at the end of the day, and running the team meeting, and also treating the clients as well as a health practitioner. So you do wear a lot of different hats. And I guess you've probably seen in your space as well with your coaching that there's a fair difference between startup mode business versus mid-tier or larger corporation sort of businesses. What do you see as the main differences between that when you're in those roles, and what are the key challenges, do you think?
I think part of what we talked about, like the context switching, where we are trying to go from practitioner to business owner, there's something so unique about that. I mean, even there are frameworks about like what kind of leader do we need to be, or what are the principles or skills that we really need to have at different size organizations, right? There's like 1 to 15, and like 50 to 40, and 100 and up. And even what we're doing in that way, like our mindset, like how much are we thinking about stabilizing cash, right? Like in the growth stage, it's like build it, like take the risk, right? Like we'll kind of, we build some scaffolding, but we really do some of that later, right? It's like we don't need it until we're ready for it. And in a larger organization, the scope is so different, right? Your world is certainly not like who's cleaning the office next week, most likely, right? Like I don't think that's I don't think that's most folks responsibility in a mid-stage organization. And then you have things that you've never done before, like if you're running an organization and it's new or scaling, we're running payroll or HR because we don't have somebody in that role yet, and we're building culture for the first time. And we're doing some of these things that aren't necessarily our responsibility. Yes, we do them on our individual team as a manager or a leader in a mid-sized org, but the responsibility, I think, is much different. I think too, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. Even the relationship that we have with other folks on the team, it has a different look and feel to me. I've been closer, and you can tell me from your experience, I feel like I've been a lot closer to the folks that I've worked with in startup organizations. I don't really like this idea of family at work, but it does get this familial kind of vibe, where you know what everyone's eating for lunch because you're eating lunch together every day, those people knew me too well, I think, at some time. In a great way, but maybe too well for them, or maybe too much for me. I'm not really sure.
No,
Yeah,
I'd agree with that, and I think it's in that startup zone. And I said trying to build something meaningful earlier. It's kind of like when you bring a bunch of people together, and you're trying to overcome a fairly significant challenge. I think most of the time people get excited by that because I think sometimes the people at work, and especially in those mid-tier or larger tier organizations, they're maybe missing meaning in the role. Perhaps it could be a generalization, but I also think one thing they are missing sometimes is that stretch challenge, as in like, this is a significant thing that we're trying to achieve as a team, so let's all get around this together and really make this work. And in startup mode, you mentioned eating lunch together and all those kinds of things. It genuinely is the way that it works, because you're having to kind of work I dare say, I dare use the word hustle, but you are hustling a little bit more. And, there's risks with that. There's obviously burnout that's getting spoken about a lot. But I think, within all that, the key role in this, especially in startup, is the leader. So if the leader's burnt out or not leading by example, or perhaps they don't have good enough emotional intelligence to realize how they're coming across at certain stages, maybe that's the key lever that you can really lean on in the startup phase. Normally that leads to a burnout of a leader, but if they do it well enough, they can achieve, maybe build out that kind of that growth plan. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was thinking too about where, a lot of the folks I work with in startup are really passionate about their
Yeah,
ideas, right? And
yeah,
some of
yeah,
that it's that enthusiasm that gets them up in the day, right? Like we're doing something,
yeah,
and some of this is truly disruptive, right? Like what, that was very overused word, but it truly is, right? We're
yeah.
creating something that's never been done before. We're hustling to get it to market.
Mm,
We're, really trying to be a part of something, but create too, right? There's so much
mm,
creation in it, and that creativity, that the journey of creativity, like when we're really inspired, like to your point, I think if you can harness it and it can be
mm.
proactive and generative, great, right? Like that's the leader that we're looking for, is the person
Yeah,
who can really harness that and then also manage themselves well enough, like in their headspace, between their ears,
of
as much
course.
as
Yeah.
they do, lead the team and inspire them and lead to a big vision. Like that's, who doesn't want it, that kind of job, right? Like that to me, I don't know, others maybe that's not their ideal, but that to me was always like, oh, let's do this.
Yeah, yeah. I think that creative energy that you can create is contagious, isn't it? In the startup mode, and as we've mentioned here, the leader is often the most passionate, which really sort of feeds the rest of the team. But you can't do that forever, right? You can't be passionate forever, and it only gets you so far. So I'm wondering, with your experience in leadership when you were working in startups, and also now that you're coaching startup leaders.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges that they face? You mentioned, looking after themselves in between their ears, and looking after their mental health. I take it is what you're getting at there. Yeah. What are the main challenges that you see?
Definitely. I have this great tool that I work with, called Leadership Circle, and
Mm,
one of the things that I've loved about working with this tool that I have learned and been able to really give language to and help other folks identify is the idea of drive, and how it is such an asset until it becomes a liability, and so common. Like
love it.
it
Yeah.
it is it was that this idea, and particularly with leaders in this role, where it really is this, like, it gets us to where we are, but it doesn't take us at scale, right? Like if you love the idea of like the superhero cape that you get to throw on because you're the hardest worker in the room, like it works, and then it doesn't, it
Yeah.
really becomes this liability. So this, I think, to your point, this idea of balance, this idea of composure, and being able
Mm,
to translate ambition and some of, those ways that we can be reactive and that get us, like, particularly in early career, if we had early success, it is drive, ambition, a lot of these things that really work for us. And then when we try to do it at scale, or when we move through those like stages of adult development and realize like there is more complexity to my life than just my work, or we add in, families and all of these other
mm.
elements, we start to see that drive, our foot on the gas pedal, we got to be able to be measured, about that. Do you have it? What do you think? You're nodding a ton, so I'm like, oh, you get drive. You feel it.
No, no. Well, I'm agreeing because in behind me, as you can see on this screen, and if you're listening to this, you won't be able to see, but I'm in my son's room, and I've got the Spider-Man little figurine behind in his cot that I can kind of see. That's probably kind of in your view as well, there, Jen. But basically, as you were saying that, it's like, for me, as I was telling my story sort of early, is like that, trying to scale things. I was doing that when I was 26, 27, so quite early. And gee, my life was different then to what it is now. And if I was doing what I was doing back then now, which was foot on the gas, let's keep going, let's push through this, everyone get motivated. And if you're not motivated, then, maybe this isn't the right place for you. That just doesn't work, as a long-term strategy. And I also think for some leaders as well, it's kind of that, it's probably a bias, and I'm probably not smart enough to remember all the different biases out there. But if I'm a leader and I'm communicating to a team in that startup zone, and I'm like, all right, everyone, we just need to do this, this, and this. Basically, my expectation then, if I'm in that zone, is it's sort of all about me, really, and what I need and what I want for our company to go to the in the right direction. But to assume that people understand what I'm saying, or that I'm communicating it, in the way that everyone receives it, is kind of missing the nuances that occur between the human connection. And I guess what I'm getting at here is introverts, extroverts. In startup world, you don't want 20 extroverts just going, yeah, let's do this. You actually need a mix of individuals there. Have you noticed that in startups as well, that if you have the same people, the same 10 people with the same personality, that things don't work? Or is that
Oh,
just me?
no, so much, so much. This is, one of the things I geek out on the most, I think, in my work is using a tool called Disk, and it's for this exact reason. So we can gather some data, right? Gather some,
Mm,
in 10 or 15 minutes, we can gather some information and put some data points together and help ourselves plot as a team on this, on a big circular graph, like what is the makeup of our team? How many folks do we have that prefer a task orientation in their role? How many people oriented folks do we have in our organization? What is our balance of fast paced and slow paced? How many folks do we have, based on the size of an organization? When we're really early stage, we may not need the process builders, right? That like higher compliance, above the line, that what we do as we start building that foundation, right? And we need those process people in the operations, right? So it is this, like, it's just this really incredible way to look at, if we got a bunch of people high influence, right? Those are the extroverts in the room,
mm,
potentially over, like, can be like over optimistic, unrealistic, right? Versus like our more reserved or like really
mm.
practical lower influence folks. Really great balance to have, right?
Yeah.
And what we see, and this is why I geek out on this data, is the way that we can be intentional about culture and bring that in. So if we've got a room and there's 10 folks who are extroverts, right, are that high above the eye yellow influence, then we know that if we want those other folks to speak, we have to slow it down. We need
Mm,
to bring the information. Some folks are going to go away and come back with deeper thoughts, right? Like, so it really is
mm.
this really cool way um, to work, you know, from a place of understanding and deep respect for one another.
Mm.
And that if we really want to get the best from these folks, they're going to have a totally different operating system than we have, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good word, actually, operating system. I like that, because I can picture in my head straight away, the people that are high on influential, perhaps, versus those that come to a meeting and they just want to get into the meeting. They want to know, all right, what's this meeting about? What do I need to do? And see you later. I'm going to do it. Whereas the people that are, I'm going to say, more influential or perhaps more social or extroverted. Again, these
Mhm.
are labels. I could be using them incorrectly, but they want to know, oh, how's your weekend? How's life? And that chit chat actually probably doesn't work for those other people. Is that right?
Definitely. And it's not just the it's not introversion, extroversion. There's also, um, so the D in DISC, which is dominance, we
Mm.
really high urgency. So, imagine I'm sitting in a
Ah,
workshop and I'm about to teach, DISC, and I've got folks all over the DISC graph. And the folks
yeah,
who I can see getting sometimes frustrated the
yeah.
soonest, because it's taking me 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes to get folks together and facilitate it, they're like, come on already, when is this meeting to start, and it really is, because we've got urgency. We need to get to it. We need to get to the thing. And so really it's really It's super interesting to see that it isn't just the chit chat. It's maybe that I have a more reflective style and don't want to chit chat with you, or maybe I got a lot of things to do and I don't have time for this, right? And so
Mm, mm.
this is a really cool tool to dive deeper and say, like, what's driving your behavior? Why is it that you need to get this done? And it's because I got stuff to do. I gotta go, you know.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So in disc, there's dominant, and so it's D for dominant. I is influence. Is that right?
Eyes influence.
Yeah.
Yep. S is steadiness, and then C is
Ah,
compliance. Yeah.
compliance. Aha. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I've done disc before, a long time ago, and we actually used it in some of our early stages of our business, which was a good exercise. We haven't gone back to it since, and we probably should. But it was quite. I remember feeling like, gee, this is really interesting to see where everyone sits in this. And shit, I think I need to change my approach when I talk to certain people, because I now know this is how they want it served up. Do you notice as well, Jen, in things like meetings, and everyone's working hybrid now, or a lot of knowledge workers are, and I'm assuming startups are perhaps in the same boat, where people working from home. There's probably some good ways that you can make sure that those people that aren't as dominant perhaps prefer to think a little bit more how they can come to a meeting. Are you seeing some new techniques that are being used in this hybrid mode?
Oh, lots. I've seen folks really genuinely pause, like 45
Mm,
seconds of silence. Does anyone have any thoughts? And then wait. Particularly if you're high
mm.
I, like, and you have a tendency to maybe, fill silence. Not that I would ever be doing that. I definitely would. But so to be really aware, I have folks, particularly like, folks with high dominance, they might even sit on their hands and count
Mm,
to 10. We have to like really think about these exercises and ways. Also, setting agenda, right, always is great for the folks who like reflection time before they're going to
mm.
bring ideas. I think that's like a pretty um, you know respectful way to get the most from people, obviously, for organizing their time and being able to decide what is the most important thing that they're doing that day, but also for those folks who prefer more time to process, or really um, high steadiness, folks who prefer like a higher steadiness communication style. They're going to want a lot of information about change. So giving a
Mhm.
lot of information about change, knowing that you've got folks who are happy to make change but just want the information to know more about it before you move forward, that can really be helpful, right? Like some of the details, some of the process, if there's process involved, if we know there are folks who, higher compliance preference, then we can get them that information and be really mindful about it. Intentional, I guess, is the way I would say, intentional about it.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good word for being a bit more intentional with your meetings. I guess in when we're all in person all the time, you just often the person that was the dominant or high influence, they'd probably just go, oh, we'll just turn up to a meeting, we'll just start it, and we'll just sort of wing it, and use our influence to keep the buzz going. But in hybrid world, they probably need to be more organized with, like you said, agendas, um, pausing for the moment for people to think. One other thing that I've been using, or we've been using in our business, that's been good. It's a tool called Mural, and it's
Yeah.
basically that virtual whiteboard or workshopping style thing, and so for example, the post-it notes that are virtual. What I've noticed in that is the people that aren't the D and the I, they're probably the S and the C. They're actually I'm learning more about how they're thinking, because is it an asynchronous environment, if that makes sense? So they can sit, they can think, they can put things up. I can put a timer on, and it's kind of silent. And I'm also like, turn your cameras off if you want. I don't really need to see your face. I just want you to participate in the thinking process, and that's it's quite good. And with all of that, there is some well-being benefits in this, because one of the best things you can do for your well-being in a startup is the leader being really great at their communication and their ability to lead, right?
Hmm. Yeah, as you were saying that too, I was thinking about the folks, and I don't know if you're one of these folks, but I'm great on a walk, right? Like I can come up with way better ideas listening into a phone call with, I
Yeah.
live in Seattle, so we're out here and, in the green trees, and that's where some great ideation can happen. So having that flexibility as a leader too, to say like, hey, you know what? Like if you need to walk, walk. I do this in coaching too. Like if we don't need to be on Zoom all day. If anything, it's probably
Yeah.
better for us to not be on Zoom, right? Like from the distraction perspective and our brain health, like it's just a
Mm.
lot to manage. So if we're going to do ideation, if we're going to do connection, if we're going to do process, like maybe it really helps to walk or to write on your own whiteboard. I have folks who do that too, where they've got a whiteboard behind them. And I think like we used to do, I know in startup, we used to like haul up in a room and get
Mm.
around a whiteboard. And even just having that access, you're standing, you're writing, it's got a more, I don't know, it reminds me of like Mad Men days of like get in a room and get creative, and
Yeah.
I worked
Yeah.
in the agency world, so you probably see that coming out right now. But it has a different way that it even feels in your body than it is like sitting at a desk again, which we've been doing a lot.
Too long. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
For sure. And with Jen, with the leaders that you coach now, so you're obviously doing this for startups and probably established businesses as well. Do you find that, like, I wish back when I was in my startup mode that I had a leadership coach, because I reckon I could have saved myself some time and some anguish with the process. Do you find that for those leaders that they are prioritizing their own development and well-being? How are they going about that, or how do you facilitate that well-being side as well? I'm interested.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think this is one of the most challenging pieces, right? I think when we ask folks like, how do we stay well? Some of it comes from um I think the learning, right? I don't know
Mm,
if you would know, and I don't know if I would have known that like I need a day off a screen to do my best work, right? Like my part of my
yeah,
work week needs to include a day where I'm not like on video with someone else, right? All day.
yeah,
I just can't get deep enough into the work that I'm
yeah,
doing, right? And I think it takes a little bit of learning to figure that out. There's other things too. Like I see folks doing the walking meeting. I see folks really prioritizing some of that. I come from a fitness background. I think it's magical and wonderful in the best possible way. I end up working with a lot of CEOs who are also athletes. It's the coolest.
I love it.
It's
How good's that?
it just worked. I know it's just the magic of who I've been fortunate. But there's this intersection, right? I think a lot of times we have this sense of like, and I don't know if this is true for you, but if you can do hard things in a physical sense, or you set that up as a part of your day where you've done something physical and lifted a weight you've never lifted before, or hit a PR on your treadmill or whatever it is, or your Peloton, like there's a switch that I think happens for people that says like, oh, I can do this. I can
Mm,
find the capacity and have the resources internally, right? The internal resources and the capacity to have a day that is what it is, right? Complex, challenging,
mm,
asking more of me than I sometimes maybe thought that I had, right?
yeah,
And I
yeah,
mean that on all fronts, right? Because if we're building startups, we also probably, we also have lives, right? It's not like the startup is our only baby, right? There's parents, there's a bigger picture, and so there's a boundary practice in that too. I work a lot with folks on boundaries. We talk about boundaries all day long,
mm,
and what does that mean, and how do we honor it, and what does it mean if you put it on the calendar and don't do it, right? And how do we get started when we don't, right? Because we inevitably won't. And what do we do on the days where I had a commitment to myself and I had to let it go, right? And how do we
yeah.
get back, or how do we be creative enough to keep that I don't know, commitment to ourselves going?
Mm. No, that makes so much sense, and I couldn't agree more with that. That idea of waking up, and I think the phrase is "eat the frog" kind of thing, where you do something physical just to have that really, like, I guess it's alone time, perhaps, or if you're in a group training environment, it's kind of that community feeling at maybe 5 or 6 in the morning, but you're doing the hardest thing physically. Really sets you up for a really great day you feel like you can achieve anything from there. You mentioned the boundaries as well. I think, one of the things that I'm kind of always talking about or have chatted with others about is that idea of energy management. So like as the leader, you can't really just push through, 40 something weeks working weeks of the year and expect to have the same energy. So the boundaries that you create within your week, and also getting away from technology, as you said, like having a day where you're not, on a screen looking or chatting with someone. Like, for example, these podcasts. I only do it on Fridays in the morning, and I've got like 3 hours that I offer each week. But it's great for my head because I know throughout the whole week I'm not having to think about this. And when I'm doing it, I'm energized and I'm excited to do it. And it's the end of the week, so I've got a little bit of, a bit of a weekend buzz to go on as well. Do you find that leaders are finding their zone pockets in their week as well to sort of have their downtime or their kind of deep work time?
I think so. I think, I've seen folks take a lot of initiative around like this idea of like defend 90, where they set that 90-minute window to do work, right,
Yep,
in the
yep.
day. Because the meetings, as you well know, like the time management piece of it is really critical. So the folks who really put intention around, I have to have time to get the work done at some point
Mm,
in the day. Those are the folks I think feel like we've got a little bit more capacity. Um, Also, I know I'll be totally honest. I think the folks who have found a way to their own kind of meditation, that's
mm,
another kind of boundary tool, right? Where we shut
yep.
it all off and say, I'm going to do 10 minutes of just whatever it is that I'm doing mindfully, whether it's, breathing or truly meditating,
Mm,
or an hour, whatever it is for the right person, right? Or I think, like you said, like I'm going to go take a walk right now, and it is this different. We move through different energy, right?
yes.
And sometimes, like, there's a great book called Burnout. Um, and it talks a lot about like they have 12 scientifically proven ways that we move through stress, right? And like if we can insert like one, two, three of those into the week, like oof, I feel like
Yep.
we're getting a handle on managing ourselves. That's the I think that's the real ticket to
Yep.
managing the energy. We got to close that stress cycle, right? And
Yep.
you don't close it just because you close your laptop, as much as I wish that were the case.
Yeah, yeah. In some ways, as for leaders, I kind of, the idea of that antivirus software that's always working in the background. I think for some leaders or some business owners, whilst they might not be working, as in talking with someone or typing something or whatever, in the background, there's that antivirus software, which is your brain that's just sort of ticking away, thinking about maybe the stress of the day or what you've got ahead of you and things like that. So if you can kind of, there is an ability on your computer, for example, to pause that antivirus software. If you kind of think of it like that, and a pause might be, a meditation, perhaps cold shower, that's getting a bit of press at the moment, or a walk. Like great little, hacks, I guess, to sort of break up that day, isn't it?
Yeah, one another metaphor that I've heard folks use is that like the you wouldn't let your phone get to 10%, right? Like you'd be
Mm.
finding a phone charger before you got to 10%, but you'll let yourself run out of battery, And
Yeah.
I think of that, like to me, I think about that. I'm like, oh, you get that warning at 20%. Don't I wish that warning would happen? Like, oh, you're on 20% of your energy. I gotta plug in.
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like
That's a Yeah, that's a great one. That's I love that. I'm going to copy that and use that, Jen, and steal it off you.
please.
Jen, I'm wondering. I've been talking a lot about the future of work, and it's kind of a topic that really people start thinking about. Where will things be in 10 years? And I guess from your area of expertise being startups, I'm imagining that for leaders in say 10 years time in that environment, there's going to be some challenges that they're facing. Do you think those challenges will be any different to what they are now, or are we talking about the same challenges that are things like well-being and being able to lead well? What do you think?
I think it will be similar. I have this, I'm holding out hope for the generation that's coming behind us that there will be more tools brought into the workplace. Like we will see things like mindfulness at work, like truly practicing
Mm,
a minute or two of, breathing exercise before we start a meeting. This is something I see companies here doing now, great companies doing here. This idea of the 4-day work week, the truly flexibility of work. Those are the things that I hope are happening. Um, and having a place too where we can talk about that this what's happening, kind of in between our ears is really what leadership is about, as much as there's this, yes, leadership is management and management of people, but the leadership piece being EQ and that is such a critical piece where it's like the task that we must do as a leader, and then the relationship. And I think of the challenges we might face, it's how do we continue in this way that we can be so distant, right? Like truly far apart, to do our work, still get connected, right? Where we really do have like fostering team play and great collaboration, selfless leadership work. Like it's still hard to see selfless leaders
that's right.
in this environment. It really, it's hard to like touch it, feel it. And so I think there's my hope, there's my little bit of concern. How do we still create that?
Yeah, yeah, no, I think you've nailed that, and I think we would hope that with time those solutions gradually evolve and present themselves. But yeah, that's really, really well said. I couldn't say it any better for the startup business sort of space and leadership. So, Jen, thanks so much for your time. I've found this really, really interesting chat. Some good stuff in there for me to learn from myself and also for others that are listening.
Thank you, Tom. It was so great chatting with you. Thank you for your time.